Thanks for sticking with us through to the final panel of the morning. My name is Brian Fung. I'm a tech reporter and business reporter for the Washington Post. Joining me today, we've got a fantastic lineup of panelists here. Pleased to welcome John Clark, who's the Vice President at Lockheed Martin Skunk Works, David Silver, Vice President of Civil Aviation at the Aerospace Industries Association, and John Wade, who's the President of Commercial Aviation at Gogo. So I just wanted to start off asking, just generally speaking, what do we think the next 5 to 10 years of flight will look like from a technology perspective? And maybe, John, do you want to start off?
Sure. So right now there's some really interesting and exciting activities going on. I'll talk specifically within our Skunk Works area, where recently we were awarded an X-plane activity, X-59, or the low boom flight demonstrator. And what that activity is aiming to do is to go evaluate the aspects of supersonic travel and understand how the sonic boom and how to best attenuate it, so the sound of a sonic boom sounds more like a door shutting as opposed to the big boom that has traditionally been seen. So what we'll get from that, so we'll have a first flight of that activity in 2021, and from that we're going to gather a lot of data that's going to allow us to inform the regulatory agencies on how to approach supersonic flight in the future, so that maybe we can fly from Los Angeles to New York in 3 hours instead of the extensive time it takes today.
David?
Well, first of all, thanks for inviting us to be here today. We're thrilled. I think the way I like to phrase it is that we are on the cusp of one of the most exciting times in the aviation industry in a long time. It's something akin to when we moved from the turboprop to the turbofan, right? Moving to the jet age, right? We're not quite Wright brothers, but we're darn close. And I look at supersonic flight, I look at unmanned aircraft. You're going to see them utilized more in remote locations within the next 5 years, eventually within city environments, and then also urban mobility, so the euphemistic air taxi. You're going to start to see those start to come in the next 5 to 10 years, initially probably with pilots. But post that, you're going to see those move towards autonomy. So it's an amazing time to be part of this industry, and we're going to make really large leaps very, very quickly.
John?
And from Gogo's perspective, clearly we're about connectivity in aviation. And I think the industry is very much used to the fact that Wi-Fi today has generally been slow and expensive. And the big change we're seeing now is that connectivity is becoming a lot faster, a lot affordable. So I think over the next few years, we're going to see the industry that was largely offline in the air becoming predominantly online in the air, and all the things that go along with that.
I wanted to come back to this concept of supersonic travel, and most consumers are probably, they remember the Concorde, but they don't know much else about supersonic flight. What has changed between then and now?
Well, so the big facet right now that you look at is that, so with the Concorde, if you go back and look at the economics of the aircraft, was not terribly profitable because of the limited flights that were available. And so it was always over the ocean, and so you had a limited set of passengers or consumers that you could take advantage of. What our X-59, or the low boom flight demonstrator activity, working in concert with NASA, what that'll allow us to do is to understand ways to attenuate that sonic boom and open up a whole nother set of commercial flight pathways that will make it a much more economical and viable opportunity for supersonic business jets or things of that nature to now be much more prevalent in the economy, as opposed to what existed before with a flight from New York.
So it's all about opening up new routes that could allow airlines to make supersonic flight.
That is an enormous facet of it, but obviously you've got to do it in such a way that allows the regulatory agencies to be okay with the noise that's being made with the new system.
What are you hearing from regulators about that prospect?
Well, first of all, we're very supportive of the languages in the House bill that just was passed yesterday, I believe. And it is focused on two sets of rulemaking. Number one is the overland ban that's currently in place, and the second is takeoff and landing of those aircraft. And most importantly, it tells the FAA to take a smart, paced methodology in terms of moving forward in this area. So The testing is going to inform us. But from the regulators, there's more than just one regulator. There's obviously the US regulators, but we also have other countries get a vote too. And so making sure that ICAO, which is based in Montreal as the aviation arm of the UN, is looking at standards and recommended practices, SARPs, that will also allow us, as we move forward in this technology, to actually operate the aircraft. I think really the most important thing, the biggest thing that I can stress is there is a lot of interest within the United States on this technology. And what we don't want to do is move so slowly that we cede the opportunities to other countries or nations.
Mm-hmm. John, I wanted to ask you a bit about drones, and obviously drones are an emerging business sector, and I'm kind of curious if Gogo has any plans to look into that at all.
We actually don't. We generally make money by people like you and I using internet service on board. I'm afraid there are not enough passengers on drones for it to be really profitable for us.
Mm-hmm. So you're not looking into sort of the communications links between drones and pilots, or drones and businesses and so forth?
We're not. We're really more focused on passenger and on the airplane itself.
David, what can you tell us about sort of the future of drone technology and the efforts to build sort of a separate layer of airspace for drones in commercial aviation?
Right. So there's UTM, Unmanned Traffic Management, is a program that the NASA has been working on for a number of years and has coordinated a lot of their efforts with the FAA. And it's primarily focused on 500 feet and below. So there has been a tremendous amount of work in trying to figure out how the system is going to operate, communications between the vehicles and the ground. Who's going to be in charge of that operation is also critical. But I think there's a danger, quite honestly, if we look at it as a separate layer. All of our air traffic is going to have to flow between each layer, and it has to happen seamlessly. For instance, an emergency rescue helicopter is going to be flying below 500 feet, especially when it comes into land. So how are you going to ensure that airspace is cleared at any point in time to enable that landing to occur, while at the same time not significantly disrupting the commerce that will occur because of the drone commerce.
As I understand it, we're still awaiting broader permission from the FAA to do, say, drone flights over people, beyond line of sight operations. Where do we stand with that? How close are those?
Wow, that's so the FAA, the DOT, has their pilot program that they authorize working with 10 sites that will allow some limited operations over people. There are a number of factors, I think, that are going to long-term affect how this economy is going to work. Number one is, the obvious one is, we have to figure out how you can allow these vehicles, which are safe and reliable, to operate over people. But then there are other issues such as homeland defense that we need to talk about. There are aspects of privacy that are going to have to be adjudicated. The issue here is not really from the technology standpoint. We have a lot of very smart people in the industry who can understand how to do things reliably and safely. But as we found over time, that there's a lot of extraneous items that crop up that sometimes slow down how quickly we can do things.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that I've experienced in covering technology is that technology is now in virtually everything. And one big trend in technology is the use of AI and machine learning and automation. So I'm kind of curious, maybe, John, you can tell us a little bit about how machine learning and AI is going to be affecting the future of aviation moving forward.
Yeah, absolutely. So at least within the Defense Department, where I see this applying, is that there's going to be a lot of new developments and systems that are going to enable the systems that are operating today to work more efficiently and effectively in concert with the human. With the more connected environment that we're working in and operating in today, you find that there's a lot more data for the humans that interact with these systems to consume, to the point that it becomes overwhelming with how much data they have to absorb to try to make a decision. And so this, the opportunity with the artificial intelligence and machine learning capabilities is to take that data and be able to sort through massive volumes of data and call out what's important and what's valuable for a human to make a decision with at that instant in time, so that the best decision is made and the safest decision is made for the systems that are there. That plays a very fundamental role in how I believe that the artificial intelligence capabilities will be applied. And it's really going to take the things that, one of the axioms that we talk about internally is that with autonomy, we want the operators of our systems to be tacticians. We want them to be thinking above the fight to make sure that they're doing the right thing at the right time, every time. And by having that information available, by augmenting them with this artificial intelligence capability, we're going to enable them to make sure that they're making the right decisions every time. And as I said, there's just so much data out there right now for a pilot or an operator to consume that it makes it very difficult for us to ensure that they're making those right decisions every time.
Well, one of the things that Silicon Valley has obviously struggled with very publicly is the use of flawed algorithms or algorithms that misidentify what's valuable, what's not, what's a valid signal, what's not. How are you grappling with that problem?
So right now, there's a couple of different angles that we're looking at. So the first one is that so the training of those algorithms is extraordinarily important. And within our Lockheed Martin organization at a corporate level, we've actually established what we call a verification and validation investment activity, where we're looking at how we can go do that verification and validation to deterministically identify that the algorithms are doing exactly what they're supposed to do each and every time. And that is a very difficult problem, which is why it's a major investment area for us at this time.
Stepping back a little bit, one big topic in Washington has been the president's trade agenda and the role of tariffs across the economy. I'm kind of curious how those policies have affected your industry, if at all.
So from AIA's perspective, the aviation industry, the aerospace manufacturers succeed despite tariffs, not because of tariffs that exist. So we are, obviously, we're all for free trade, but at the same time, we're closely monitoring and communicating with our members about the impacts of any potential tariffs on our global supply chain, as well as for impacts in terms of export of our products long term.
Have your members noticed changes in costs that they are facing as a result of these policies?
Quite honestly, I'm not enough in the weeds on that, and I particularly should be able to comment.
Fair enough. John, I wonder, we've talked a little bit about communications technology, but I want to expand on that. Right now we're seeing an explosion of consumption, among people on the ground of streaming media and other data-intensive applications. But when I get on a plane, that's still not really widely available to me. So what's your expectation for those types of features in in-flight connectivity?
Well, fortunately, that era is now arriving. And we're in the middle of rolling out our new generation of much higher speed connectivity. It's available on about 900 aircraft today, and there's about another 1,000 aircraft that will be installed in that over the next few years. And it very much changes the paradigm from being a slow browsing experience to one that feels much more ground-like. We have about almost 500 aircraft with Delta today that are equipped with this technology, and passengers are happily streaming from Hulu or Amazon Prime or any of those other video services and enjoying Game of Thrones, or even more recently, streaming TV. So we're very much getting to that point now where connectivity has emerged out of the slow and expensive era into one where it's much more affordable and much more like the experience we have on the ground today.
Mm-hmm. We just recently, yesterday, had a hearing in the Senate on tech companies and their privacy practices, telecom companies and their privacy practices as they become much more like tech companies. So I'm just wondering if you would kind of weigh in on that for us. One big question that came out of that hearing was, would you support a comprehensive federal privacy law covering, all 50 states?
Sure. We've always taken passenger information privacy very, very seriously. We treat it in the way that any other ISP would in terms of maintaining sort of integrity around data, whether it's PCI compliance or any of those other policies associated with passenger privacy. So we're very aware of the fact that people want privacy in terms of their data today, and we're very supportive of that. Should
consumers have a choice to opt into whether their data is shared with the provider, or do you prefer more of an opt-out approach?
I think the opt-in is the right way to do it. I mean, if we look overseas, that's generally the policy that people adopt, and that's the way we feel about it.
Great. one issue that was brought up in earlier panels was the environment, and so I'd like to ask a little bit about climate change beyond the use of renewable fuels. Are there technologies or materials that are on the horizon that could help the aviation industry address that challenge?
Yeah, so I'll take a swing at it. So one of the activities that we've also similarly explored with NASA is the opportunity to have much more efficient flight for cargo type vehicles. And so you may have seen last year pretty significant discussion around the idea of a hybrid wing body. And you get a significantly more lift out of a hybrid wing body construct than you do out of the traditional tube and wing that promulgates most of the commercial aviation today. And so with that hybrid wing body, you would be able to have a much more efficient platform that saves significant amounts of fuel while hauling large amounts of cargo around. And that cargo at one point may actually transcend into passenger jets as that technology continues to mature. The challenge, there's also a barrier to entry with some of that, with the premise that there's a lot of airports around the world that have been facilitized, centered around how airplanes operate today. And so you think about that change in an aircraft, the cost or the benefit associated with those fuel savings are going to have to offset significant amount of facility cost as well.
Yeah, I would also add that there's a lot of work going on globally. Recently, we had the CO2 carbon emissions changes going into effect. Each generation of commercial aircraft has been better than the generation before. And we as an industry are going to continue to focus on doing those types of things. And we have programs with the FAA looking for those opportunities using the CLEAN program and others to continue to improve.
Are there specifics that you can talk about?
Well, we had the CO2, but the next ones, actually globally, non-volatile particulate matter, MVPMs, are another issue that is now rising up. We work closely also with the Europeans, monitoring what the Europeans are up to in terms of looking at, what the emissions of these aircraft, what it looks like. And then there were programs like actually NextGen, where the more efficient that the flight path is, the less fuel that you're actually going to burn. So these are all things that contribute to make the whole better.
John, there have been a number of technologies that were developed for military applications that then became very influential in the civilian space. What kind of technologies can we expect, that to happen with moving forward in the next 5 to 10 years, do you think?
Wow, that's there's so much. So, right now, I think the one that's probably most prominent, I think that I'd go back to the artificial intelligence and machine learning activities that are there. Obviously, the commercial industry is investing extraordinary amounts of money in that. I believe I read a statistic recently that over 80% of the S&P 500 companies are now calling out, some element of AI as part of their strategy going forward. So it's a huge movement, but the opportunity with the defense industry is going to be centered on that idea that we're really going to have a lot more rigor in what we put forth, the commercial industry, and a lot of what the applications that will apply there. They're going to be able to move a little faster in putting capabilities to market, but the rigor that we're going to have to put into it, I think that rigor will flow into the commercial market and make those types of applications much more beneficial for the consumer.
Great. Well, I wanted to wrap up here so that everyone can sort of get to the main event of the day, which is the Kavanaugh hearings. So thank you to our guests, and hope to see you again here soon back at Washington Post Live.
Thank you.
Thank you.